June 14th, 1856, over 30,000 people gathered at Stafford Prison, eagerly awaiting the arrival of one man. The man was all the people of England talked about recently. His crime sickened most, even in a century where it seemed like murder was the norm. Finally, after what seemed like hours, he finally arrived. The crowd of over 30,000 all went silent as he made his way onto the stage. Once there, George Smith, a veteran executor, nodded his head to the man. He nodded back, realizing out of everyone there, he would be the only one to show him an ounce of respect. The prison governor, who was also sent to the event, looked at the small and stout man and asked him a question that everyone needed answered. Would you like to confess your guilt of the crimes you are accused of? Thinking for a moment, the man eyed the governor and simply said, "Hello, my name is Joseph Palmer, and today I wanted to cover the infamous case of William Palmer, a man dubbed the Prince of Poisoners, and although William was only convicted of one murder, he is believed to have killed many more, including his wife and 4 of his children. Now, without further ado, let's dive into the life of William Palmer." William Palmer was born August 6 in 1824 to Joseph and Sarah Palmer. He was the 6th of 8 children and grew up fairly wealthy, and young William had no problem informing other children of this. In school, he was known to be a bully, berating others who were not as fortunate as him. However, when he turned 12, his father passed away, leaving the family with a rather large sum of £70,000. 5 years later, when William was 17, he secured a job as an apprentice for a Liverpool chemist. The employment didn't last too long, as he was fired in just 3 months for allegedly stealing. From there, William studied medicine in London and qualified as a physician in August of 1846. After returning to Staffordshire later that year, Palmer met plumber and glazier George Abley at the Lamb and Flag Public House in Little Haywood, a local pub, and challenged him to a drinking contest. Abley accepted, and an hour later was carried home, where he died in bed later that evening. Nothing was ever proved, but locals noted that Palmer had an interest in Abley's attractive wife. This is speculation and has not been proven that William was responsible. However, given what we know of him, it is certainly possible that George may have been his first victim. Palmer, not long after, returned home to Rugeley to practice as a doctor. During this time, he met a beautiful young woman named Anne Thornton. The two quickly fell in love and married on October 7th, 1847. For 2 years, everything seemed to go relatively well. However, in January of 1849, Anne's mother came to stay with William and his wife. Nearly as soon as she came, Mrs. Thornton began to feel ill, often confined to her bedroom. And in just 2 weeks, after arriving at the home, she was dead. A doctor named Branford was called in to identify the cause of death. William, being a fellow doctor, most likely persuaded the elderly Dr. Branford into agreeing with his theory to the woman's death. It worked, and Mrs. Thornton's death was diagnosed as epilepsy, or as what we call today, a stroke. William most likely had gotten away with murder once again, and not only that, he and his wife received a percentage of Thornton's inheritance. However, William was disappointed, as he was hoping it would have been much greater. You see, William had a very expensive hobby, horse racing, and one day while at his favorite track, he met a fellow gambler named Leonard Bladden. The two became fast friends and would meet up regularly, sharing drinks and betting on their favorite horses to win. Unfortunately for William, Leonard seemed to be much better at picking winners. One day around May of 1850, Leonard won a large sum at the tracks and lent William £600. Unfortunately for him, it would be the worst mistake he would ever make, as William had no intention of paying him back. Leonard not long after became violently ill, and of course William was there to lend his friend a hand. On May 10th of 1850, at William's home, Leonard passed away. Strangely, he died with very little money in his pocket, despite his winnings. His betting book was also missing, so it seems no one knew that he had lent William any money at all. A doctor was called in, and once again Palmer convinced him that Leonard died due to a, quote, abscess of the pelvis. These murders were of course horrible. However, his next victims would show how truly twisted and evil the doctor was. Palmer's first son, William Brooks Palmer, was born towards the end of 1848 and christened in January of 1849. He outlived his father, dying on the 29th of April, 1926. The Palmers had 4 more children. However, these other ones were not so lucky. I'm not sure how to go about this next section, but I think instead of describing in detail the infants' final moments, I will quickly summarize their names, dates of birth, and their deaths. All of the infants discussed were noted as dying by convulsions. However, he most likely killed them the same way he killed everyone else, by using strychnine, a popular drug used in the 19th century to help as a stimulant. However, in large or even medium doses, it would be fatal. Elizabeth Palmer died on the 6th of January, 1851. She was about 2.5 months old at the time of her death. Henry Palmer died on the 6th of January, 1852. He was about a month old. Frank Palmer died on the 19th of December, 1852. He was only 7 hours old following his birth. John Palmer died on the 27th of January, 1854. He was 3 or 4 days old. The death of her children absolutely crushed Anne. She became withdrawn from society, believing she may have been cursed. Losing her mother and children in such a short time, it was understandable that she felt that way. Anne believed William was just as heartbroken as her. Even though he didn't show it, he would still gamble, drink, go to bed, and do it all again. It was his way of grieving, she concluded. You see, Anne never got the chance to know her real husband, as in just 8 months after the death of her last child, Anne would pass away as well. On September 29, 1854, William was on cloud 9. He got away with killing so many people with no consequences at all. However, William wouldn't remain a free man for long, and in just 2 short years from now, the Prince of Poisoner's crimes would come to life, shocking everyone around him. Thank you so much for watching. Next time we will continue the story of William Palmer, and how he was finally brought to justice. Thank you so much once again, and I hope you all have a fantastic week. (1878) A Cree hunter treks through the thick Canadian snow. It's been 3 days since his last meal, and just as many since he had a warm bed. This year has been horrible, and mass starvation has ravaged the Cree people. His feet and hands are frozen. However, despite his pain, the hunter remains focused. "I'll find something soon," he mutters to himself. But his thoughts don't mean too much. He's muttered that phrase since day one, but this time he means it. At the rate he's going, it needs to be true. And after a few more moments, his heart begins to beat with excitement. No, he didn't find an elk or a moose, but maybe something better. A small cabin nestled deep in the woods. With a deep breath, he makes his way towards the cabin and enters. An uncanny stench wafts through the open door, and the hunter falls to his knees. The cabin is surprisingly clean for the smell. In fact, it's extremely bare, with just one large pot on the stove. Normally he would call out to the owner and ask for help, but not this time. Food is much more important right now. He walks over to the pot and opens it. The stench of death surrounds him. The hunter, a grizzled veteran who's seen the worst of the worst, takes off running, as what he saw in the pot would haunt the man for the rest of his life. Hello, my name is Joseph Palmer, and today I wanted to discuss one of the most disturbing cases I have come across so far, about a man named Swift Runner who devoured his family. Now, I think this goes without saying, but I will be discussing some pretty disturbing details in this video. So if it is a bit too much, and I completely understand, please consider checking out other videos on my channel, as it would mean a lot. And if you wouldn't mind subscribing to get more videos like this in the future, I would certainly appreciate it. Now, without further ado, let's dive into the case of the man who ate his family. Swift Runner was a talented hunter and trapper, frequently trading his skins and wares at the Hudson's Bay Company. There he met and befriended many officers, and in 1875, even served as a guide for the Northwest Mounted Police. By all accounts, Swift Runner was a kind and well-liked man, who was a talented hunter, and acted lovingly to his wife and 6 children. He was also physically imposing, with a muscular build and standing well over 6 feet tall, which was unusual for the time. As a young man, he received a solid and useful Cree education, which taught him how to survive in the harsh Canadian wilderness, hunting and trapping some of North America's most dangerous game. His life was pretty happy and relatively peaceful, but the good times did not last forever. 1878 was a time of starvation for the Cree people, and Swift Runner and his family suffered as well. The family went days without eating. At first they managed staying positive. Swift Runner would leave, confident that he would find something, but most days ended up with him returning home empty. He would catch a rabbit or a squirrel here and there, but it wasn't enough to support such a large family. One night Swift Runner returned home and was so tired he collapsed just outside his bedroom. When he was passed out, he dreamed of sitting at his table, devouring a large meal. The meat tasted great, and he couldn't get enough. Once his plate was empty, he went back to the stove to grab more. However, as he opened up the pot, a scream left his mouth. He was staring at the severed head of his youngest daughter. Swift Runner woke up from his nightmare. He put on his moccasins and coat and left to hunt. Like usual, he returned empty-handed. The dream he had the night before came back again, and again the next night. But something happened. With each dream, he grew less and less terrified and disgusted about what he was doing, and even grew excited to dream about devouring that meat. Finally, the dreams weren't good enough, and he needed the real thing. The police started to hear stories in the spring. A Cree chief said Swift Runner had turned cannibal, and a hunter reported that Swift Runner's entire family had been killed in the woods. But a squad of officers who went out to investigate couldn't find Swift Runner or his family. Instead, Swift Runner went to the police himself in the spring, telling them his wife had committed suicide and the rest of his family had died of starvation. But the officer noticed that Swift Runner didn't look starving. Quote, "The prisoner arrived at our camp in the spring and did not look very poor or thin, or as if he had been starving." Suspicious of the story, police traveled with Swift Runner to his family's camp. At the cabin, Swift Runner took one of the officers to a small makeshift grave and informed him that his son was buried there. The officers dug up the grave and saw it was undisturbed. However, as time went on, officers found more and more discarded bones around the property. When confronted, Swift Runner finally admitted to what happened. And remember how I said I would be discussing some pretty disturbing details? Well, here's what Swift Runner claimed happened to his family. At first, Swift Runner became haunted by dreams. A Wendigo spirit called on him to consume the people around him. The spirit crept through his mind, gradually taking control. Then, the Wendigo killed and ate Swift Runner's wife. With this accomplished, the Wendigo forced one of Swift Runner's boys to kill and butcher his younger brother. While enjoying his grisly meal, the spirit hung Swift Runner's infant son by the neck from a lodge pole and tugged at the baby's dangling feet. It was later shown that he had also done away with Swift Runner's brother and his mother-in-law, though he acknowledged she had been a bit tough to eat. The officers were of course disturbed to their very core, and hauled Swift Runner away to Fort Saskatchewan. The trial began on August 8, 1879. The judge and jury did not view the Wendigo idea in the same light as the Cree. They saw Swift Runner as a murderer, and the trapper made no attempt to hide his guilt. Magistrate Richardson quickly sentenced him to be hanged. But there was one problem. They've actually never conducted an execution. The Hudson's Bay Company did hang an employee for murder, but this was the first formal execution in Western Canada. Staff Sergeant Fred Badgley was in charge of carrying this out. A gallows was erected within the fort enclosure at Fort Saskatchewan. An old army pensioner named Rogers was made hangman. On the appointed morning, a bitterly cold December 20th, Swift Runner was led to the scaffold. There was a large crowd that gathered eagerly awaiting the man to die. He was given the opportunity to address the crowd. Swift Runner admitted his guilt and thanked the guards for their kindness. Apparently the officers did a great job with the hanging, as a California Spectator named Jim Reed said, quote, "That's the purest hanging I've ever seen. And it's the 29th. An article detailing Swift Runner's last walk gives us an insight to the day of the hanging, including the number of people in attendance, 60, and the weather, swirling snow. I'll attach it here if you want to take a look. Swift Runner was reported to be a kind and hard-working man who loved his family. However, Under the stress of extreme hunger, something overtook the man, and he did the unthinkable. And although his crimes took place over 100 years ago, I can only hope that his family were able to find peace in the hereafter.